I'm being called cruel, but nobody wants to hear my side of what actually went down. They think I destroyed a good man on purpose, that I knew exactly what I was doing when I said those words. What they don't know is I was destroying myself at the same time. My entire circle has turned against me, mutual friends won't return my texts, his sister blocked me everywhere, and my own mother asked if I'd finally pushed too far. The worst part isn't their anger. It's that I'm starting to wonder if they're right, if the version of me I've been defending only exists in my head. But they weren't there for the months before. They didn't see what led up to that moment. I'm going to walk you through everything, including the part I haven't told anyone, the real reason I said what I said. There's a text message I sent 3 hours before our fight that changes everything, and when you see what it contains, you'll understand why I've been unable to eat or sleep for 2 weeks straight. Looking back now, I can pinpoint exactly when things started tilting wrong, even though I didn't recognize it then. Jake and I had been together for almost 3 years, living together for one, and I thought I'd finally found stability after a string of relationships that left me feeling inadequate. He was steady, reliable, the kind of guy who texted when he'd be late and remembered to buy my specific brand of coffee. My friends adored him. My family asked when we'd get engaged. But there was this restlessness growing inside me that I couldn't name. I'd catch myself scrolling through my ex's social media, not because I wanted him back, but because his life looked exciting, travel photos, new ventures, constant adventure. Meanwhile, Jake and I fell into the same routine: work, dinner on the couch, weekends at his parents' lake house. I told myself I was being ungrateful, that this was what healthy relationships looked like. The alternative had been chaos and heartbreak. My best friend Marissa got engaged that spring to someone she'd only dated for 8 months. Her ring was enormous, the proposal elaborate, a flash mob in downtown, photographers capturing everything. She was glowing when she showed us the video and I smiled and congratulated her, but something acidic churned in my stomach. Jake had been there too, looking uncomfortable during the whole display. On the drive home he said, "That's not really us, right? All that public spectacle stuff." I agreed with him. I did, but I also felt something shrink inside me. The thought that crept in small at first, just a whisper, was that maybe I'd settled. Maybe I'd chosen safety over passion because I was scared. Maybe Jake was the placeholder guy, the one you date before you meet your actual person. I pushed it down immediately, horrified at myself. This was exactly the toxic thinking that had ruined my previous relationships. Jake was good. He loved me. What more did I need? Then Marissa asked me to be her maid of honor, and suddenly my calendar filled with wedding planning events. Dress fittings, cake tastings, venue visits. Every event was a reminder of what Jake and I didn't have: that spark, that certainty, that feeling of this is my person. I started comparing constantly. Marissa's fiancé surprised her with weekend getaways. Jake surprised me by organizing our closet. Marissa's fiancé wrote her love letters. Jake texted "love you" with a thumbs up emoji. I never said any of this out loud. Instead, I became critical in small, cutting ways. When Jake suggested we stay in on Saturday night, I'd sigh and say something about how we never did anything spontaneous. When he tried to plan a nice dinner, I'd point out that the restaurant wasn't very original, we'd been there before. I could see him trying harder, which somehow made it worse. His effort felt like proof that it shouldn't require this much work. At Marissa's bachelorette party, after too many drinks, I confessed some of this to the bridesmaids. Not everything, just enough, that things felt stale, that I wondered if Jake was really my forever person. They were supportive in that way women are when you're complaining about your relationship, offering validation without solutions. Except Marissa's cousin Alexis, who barely knew me, asked a direct question: "Why are you still with him then?" I didn't have a good answer. I said something about loving him, about our history, about not wanting to throw away 3 years. But her question lodged in my brain like a splinter. The truth I wasn't admitting, even to myself, was that I'd been actively looking for reasons to leave. Gathering evidence. Building a case against Jake in my mind where he was guilty of being too boring, too predictable, too content with ordinary life. I wanted him to give me a clear reason to go: cheating, lying, some dramatic betrayal that would make the decision obvious. When no betrayal appeared, I started trying to manufacture conflict. I'd pick fights over small things, hoping they'd escalate into something bigger. He'd forget to pick up milk, and I'd turn it into a conversation about how he never listened. He'd choose the wrong movie, and I'd make it about how we weren't compatible. Each time, Jake would apologize and try to fix things, which made me feel simultaneously guilty and resentful. Why couldn't he just fight back? Why couldn't he give me something to work with? My friend Taylor noticed the change. She pulled me aside after a group dinner where I'd snapped at Jake for talking too long about a work project. "What's going on with you two?" she asked. "You've been acting weird around him." I deflected, said I was stressed about work. But Taylor pressed, "You're being kind of mean to him, honestly. He's just trying to share his life with you." That stung because it was true, but I convinced myself Taylor didn't understand. She was single and hadn't been in a long-term relationship. She didn't know how the magic fades, how you start to see all the ways your partner disappoints you. I was just being realistic about our incompatibility. It was actually more honest than pretending everything was perfect. I started going out more without Jake, girls' nights that stretched late, after-work drinks that I didn't invite him to. I told myself I needed space, needed to remember who I was outside the relationship. Really, I was testing what it felt like to be untethered, available. I wasn't looking to cheat exactly, but I wanted to feel desired by someone who didn't know all my annoying habits, someone who might see me as exciting and mysterious instead of familiar. At one of these happy hours, I met Connor through a coworker. He was visiting from the Seattle office in town for a few weeks. Objectively attractive, confident in that way that borders on arrogant. We talked about travel. He just got back from Thailand and career ambitions and all the things that felt sophisticated and adult. He asked smart questions and maintained eye contact that lasted a beat too long. When the group headed to another bar, he walked next to me, his arm brushing mine. Nothing happened that night, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. I went home to Jake, who was already asleep on the couch waiting for me, and felt annoyed that he'd waited up. Annoyed that he'd care, that he'd be relieved I was home safe. His love felt like an obligation, a weight I hadn't agreed to carry. Connor and I started texting. Just friendly at first, funny observations about the office, recommendations for restaurants in the city, then slightly more personal. He'd send a photo from a work dinner, and I'd respond late at night when Jake was already asleep. The texting was innocent enough that I didn't delete the messages, but charged enough that I didn't mention Connor to Jake. This is where I need you to understand something about the version of me that existed then. I convinced myself I was the victim of my own relationship, that I'd been trapped by my fear of being alone, that Jake was holding me back from some bigger, better life I deserved. The narrative I'd constructed had me as the protagonist who'd settled too young and now needed to break free. Jake was the anchor, not the partner. When Marissa's wedding weekend arrived, I was in a specific headspace. Brittle, looking for proof that I'd made the wrong choice with Jake, primed for disaster. Connor had been texting more frequently, and while nothing overtly flirtatious had happened, there was an energy to our conversations that felt dangerous and addictive. I'd been fantasizing in vague terms about what it would be like to be with someone like him instead. Someone who'd want to jet off to Thailand, who'd consider a flash mob proposal, who'd make me feel like the main character in my own life. Jake and I drove to the wedding venue on Friday, and he was trying to make conversation about the ceremony, asking if I was nervous about my maid of honor speech. I gave short answers, irritated by his attempts at normalcy when I felt anything but normal inside. He asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine in a tone that made it clear I didn't want to discuss it. The rehearsal dinner was beautiful, waterfront venue, string lights, perfect weather. Marissa and her fiancé did this choreographed dance thing that everyone found adorable. Jake leaned over and whispered, "Thank God we'd never do something like that," like we were in on a joke together. But I looked at Marissa's face, radiant and certain, and felt a surge of something ugly. Why did she get that certainty? Why was she allowed to be happy while I felt stuck? After dinner, the wedding party stayed up drinking on the venue's terrace. Jake had gone back to our room, tired from the drive. Connor texted me a photo of the Seattle skyline with the caption, "Wish I was at a wedding on the water instead of this corporate hotel." Without thinking too hard about it, I texted back, "Wish you were here too." His response came fast, "Yeah." I stared at that single word for a full minute before typing, "Yeah, more interesting conversation at least." We texted back and forth while I sat there with my bridesmaids, physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. The conversation escalated in that way digital flirting does, suggestive but deniable, testing boundaries. He asked if I was happy. I said honestly no, not really. He said life was too short to be unhappy. I said I was starting to realize that. Then he wrote, "If you were here right now, what would you want to do?" And I wrote back, and this is the text message I mentioned at the beginning, the one I haven't told anyone about. I'd want to forget about my relationship for a night and just feel something real again. The moment I hit send, I knew I'd crossed a line. This wasn't innocent anymore. This was betrayal, even if nothing physical had happened. Connor responded immediately, something about how he'd helped me feel alive again, and I felt this rush of validation and terror. I'd been seen, desired, chosen by someone who didn't have to choose me. I went back to the room where Jake was sleeping and couldn't look at him. He was in his threadbare college t-shirt, mouth slightly open, completely vulnerable and trusting. I just texted another man about wanting to escape our relationship, and here Jake was, peacefully asleep, assuming we were fine. The next morning, wedding day, I was anxious and guilty and overstimulated. I snapped at Jake during breakfast when he asked about the timeline. During photos, I avoided him, staying with the bridal party. I could feel him trying to catch my eye, confused by my coldness, but I couldn't face him. Every time I looked at him, I thought about that text to Connor, about how I'd betrayed him in spirit if not in fact. The ceremony was beautiful and made me feel worse. Watching Marissa and her fiancé exchange vows, all that certainty and joy, I felt completely hollow. Jake reached for my hand during the readings and I let him hold it but didn't squeeze back. I was already gone, mentally, emotionally. I was just waiting for the courage to make it official. At the reception, I drank too much. Jake was trying to be attentive, asking if I wanted to dance, bringing me water, all the considerate boyfriend things. But every kindness felt like an accusation. Why couldn't he just be awful so I could justify what I was feeling? Why did he have to be so goddamn nice? During my maid of honor speech, I talked about true love and finding your person and all these concepts I didn't believe in anymore, at least not for myself. Everyone clapped and Marissa hugged me with tears in her eyes and I felt like a fraud. After the speech, Jake found me at the bar. He looked worried, said we needed to talk, that something had been off all weekend. I told him not now, not here, but he persisted. Said he could feel me pulling away, that he deserved to know what was happening. And something in his gentle insistence, that he deserved honesty, that he deserved better than my cold shoulder, snapped something in me. We stepped outside to a quieter area away from the reception. Jake took my hands and asked me directly, "Are we okay? Because you've been acting like you can't stand to be around me." I should have been honest. I should have said I was confused, that I needed space to think, that we needed to have a serious conversation when we weren't at a wedding. Instead, all my built-up resentment and guilt came pouring out in the cruelest possible way. "Do you want the truth?" I heard myself say. "The truth is I'm bored." "This us, all of it, it's boring, you're boring." Jake's face went white. "What are you talking about?" And this is where it happened, the thing I can't take back. I looked at this man who loved me, who done nothing but try to make me happy, and I said, "You're not man enough for me, Jake. You're just not enough. You're safe and predictable and completely average, and I don't want average. I want more than this." The words were out before I could stop them, designed to hurt, to wound him so badly he'd leave me and I wouldn't have to be the one to make the decision. I wanted him to hate me because I hated myself. Jake stepped back like I'd physically struck him. "Not man enough." His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, but it's true. I need someone with more ambition, more passion, more everything. You're a good guy, but you're not the right guy for me." I watched his expression cycle through shock, hurt, confusion, and then something I'd never seen before, complete shutdown. His eyes went empty. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, if that's how you feel." He turned and walked back toward the hotel. Not running, not dramatic, just walking away with his shoulders hunched. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, drunk and cruel and convinced I'd just freed both of us from a dying relationship. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt like I might throw up. I went back to the reception and drank more, texted Connor something flirty, danced with the bridesmaids who didn't yet know what had happened. I was playing the part of someone having a great time while internally imploding. Around midnight, I went back to our room and found Jake's stuff gone. He left a note on the hotel stationery, "I'll get the rest of my things from the apartment this week. I hope you find what you're looking for." That's when it hit me, really hit me, what I'd done. Not just the words, but the intent behind them. I'd systematically destroyed a good relationship because I'd built up a fantasy about what I deserved, about some imaginary better life waiting for me. I'd chosen to believe Jake was the problem instead of examining my own issues. I called him 17 times that night. He didn't answer. I texted apologies, explanations, take-backs, nothing. I barely slept, and the next morning I had to smile through the post-wedding brunch while knowing I'd nuked my entire life. The drive home alone was 5 hours of clarity I didn't want. Everything I told myself about Jake holding me back, about needing more, it all revealed itself as bullshit. The problem wasn't that Jake was boring. The problem was that I'd romanticized instability and chaos because stability felt too simple, too adult, too permanent. I've been actively sabotaging us because commitment terrified me. Connor texted me that Sunday, "How was the rest of the wedding?" I looked at that message and felt nothing. No excitement, no chemistry, no connection. Just the hollow realization that I'd blown up my relationship for a fantasy, for the idea of someone rather than the reality of what I had. I didn't text him back. Instead, I went to our apartment, my apartment now, and saw all the empty spaces where Jake's things had been. His bookshelf gone, his coffee mugs missing, his hoodies no longer on the hook by the door. The absence was staggering. Taylor called me that afternoon. Apparently Jake had told his best friend who told his girlfriend, and now everyone knew. "Please tell me you didn't actually say what I heard you said," Taylor began. I started crying and couldn't stop. Between sobs, I tried to explain the pressure from the wedding, the confusion I'd been feeling, how the words came out worse than I meant them. Taylor listened, then said something I'll never forget. "You do realize you were dating the male version of yourself, right? Jake was steady and kind and showed up for you, which is exactly what you claim to want. But the second it got real, you panicked and destroyed it. This isn't about him not being man enough. This is about you being terrified of actually being loved." I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't. She was completely right. Jake blocked my number after I sent him a long, rambling apology text. He blocked me on social media. His sister sent me a message calling me a manipulative nightmare before blocking me too. His friends unfollowed me. I became persona non grata in our entire social circle practically overnight. Marissa called me from her honeymoon, upset because the end of her reception had been tainted by drama. Several people had seen Jake leaving, had asked questions. She'd heard what I said, and while she tried to be supportive, I could hear the disappointment in her voice. I just don't understand why you'd say something so cruel, she said. Even if you wanted to break up, why would you go for the jugular like that? I didn't have an answer that made sense, because I was scared, because I wanted him to hurt as much as I'd been hurting, because I'd convinced myself he deserved it for the crime of being stable. None of it held up to scrutiny. Work became unbearable. We had mutual coworkers who'd hung out with us as a couple. They were awkward around me now, clearly Team Jake. I heard through the grapevine that he'd told people we'd broken up but hadn't shared the details, which somehow made me look worse. People filled in the gaps with gossip and speculation. Connor asked me out for drinks. I said no. He pushed, referenced our texts, acted like we had something. I realized he was exactly the kind of guy I thought I wanted, confident to the point of pushy, treating me like a sure thing, interested only because I'd been unavailable. The reality of him was so much less appealing than the fantasy had been. I told him I wasn't interested, that I'd been dealing with relationship stuff and shouldn't have led him on. He got cold immediately, called me a tease, blocked me. That was my upgrade, my something more. The worst part was the crying. I couldn't stop. I cried getting ready for work, cried in my car during lunch, cried myself to sleep every night. My friends were sympathetic at first, but after a couple weeks I could feel their patience wearing thin. I'd done this to myself. I'd said unforgivable things to a good man. Why did I get to wallow? My mom came over one evening and found me on the couch, unwashed, surrounded by tissues, wearing one of Jake's old sweatshirts he'd left behind. Honey, she said carefully, I need to ask you something. Do you miss Jake, or do you miss having a boyfriend? I miss Jake, I sobbed. I miss everything about him. I made a mistake. I just want him back. Why did you say what you said? And there it was, the question I'd been avoiding. Why had I chosen those specific words, that specific cruelty? Because I wanted to make sure he'd leave, I admitted. Because I was too scared to just have a normal conversation about my feelings. Because I thought if I made him hate me, it would be easier than admitting I was scared of how much I loved him. Saying it out loud made it real. I'd sabotaged the best relationship I'd ever had because vulnerability felt more dangerous than cruelty. Mom sighed. Have you told him this? Have you actually apologized and explained? He won't talk to me. He blocked me everywhere. Maybe write him a letter, put it all down. Don't expect a response, but at least he'll know the truth. I spent 3 days writing that letter. Pages and pages of honesty I should have given him months ago. I apologized for the words, for the intent, for the systematic way I'd poisoned our relationship. I explained my fears about settling, about being enough, about deserving love. I told him about Connor, about the text, about how I'd been emotionally cheating even if nothing physical happened. I didn't make excuses or ask for another chance. I just wanted him to know he hadn't done anything wrong, that the failure was entirely mine. I mailed it to his parents' house where I knew he was staying. Then I waited. 2 weeks passed with no response. I threw myself into therapy, finally addressing the patterns I'd been repeating, the self-sabotage, the fear of intimacy, the way I'd rather blow things up than risk getting hurt. My therapist asked if I'd always struggled with feeling worthy of love. The answer was obviously yes. My dad had left when I was 7, and I'd spent my entire adolescence trying to be interesting enough, special enough, perfect enough to make him come back. He never did. So I learned that love was conditional, that people left when you became ordinary, that you had to constantly perform and provide excitement to deserve staying. Jake had loved me anyway, loved me on lazy Sundays and sweatpants, loved me when I had the flu, loved me in all my boring, regular moments. And I've been unable to accept it because it didn't fit my narrative about how love works. This realization didn't fix anything. Jake was still gone. My friends were still distant. I'd still said unforgivable things, but at least I understood why. 3 weeks after I sent the letter, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Jake, using a different phone. I read your letter. I appreciate the apology, but it doesn't change anything. What you said revealed how you actually see me, and I can't be with someone who fundamentally doesn't respect me. I hope you figure out your stuff. Please don't contact me again. That was it. No anger, no emotion, just finality. And somehow that hurt worse than if he cursed me out. I showed the text to Taylor, desperate for her to tell me there was still hope, some way to fix this. Babe, she said gently, you broke his heart and his sense of self-worth in one sentence. You don't get to decide when he's ready to forgive you or if he ever is. You have to let him go. But I love him. I know, but love isn't enough when you've done this much damage. The full impact of losing Jake hit me in waves over the following months. I'd see something funny and instinctively reach for my phone to text him before remembering. I'd cook dinner and accidentally make enough for 2. I'd hear a song we both liked and have to pull over because I was crying too hard to drive safely. I tried dating again after a couple months. A disastrous first date with a guy from an app who spent the entire dinner talking about his ex. I realized I was comparing him to Jake, that I'd probably compare everyone to Jake, that I'd set the Jake standard in my mind right after destroying my actual chance with Jake. Marissa's post-wedding photos appeared on social media. There were several of Jake and me together looking happy. I was smiling at the camera. He was looking at me with such open affection it made my chest hurt. That man had loved me completely, and I'd weaponized his vulnerabilities against him. One of Jake's friends, one of our mutual friends who'd stayed neutral, ran into me at a coffee shop. She was civil but cool, and I asked how he was doing. "He's okay," she said carefully. "Dating someone new actually, she seems really nice." The news leveled me. Objectively, I had no right to be upset. I'd ended things in the cruelest way possible. He deserved to move on, to find someone who wouldn't tear him down when she got scared, but the jealousy was acid in my throat. "That's good," I managed. "He deserves to be happy." "He does," she agreed with an emphasis that felt pointed. That night I looked at our old photos, all the evidence of the relationship I'd had and destroyed. Beach trips, holidays, lazy mornings, inside jokes captured in images. We'd been happy, really happy. And I'd convinced myself we weren't, because happiness felt too simple, too accessible, not cinematic enough. I wanted the relationship to be harder so I could feel like I'd earned it. When it came easily, when Jake just loved me without games or drama, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to leave, so I dropped it myself. My therapist asked what I'd learned from all this. I said I learned that I was capable of cruelty, that my fear could make me hurt people I loved, that I needed to work on my issues before trying to be in a relationship again. "And what about Jake?" she asked. "What about him? Have you forgiven yourself for what happened?" I started crying again, like I did in every session. "How can I? I destroyed someone who loved me." I said the one thing I knew would hurt him most. I was calculating about it. "You were also scared and self-destructive and dealing with unprocessed trauma. You can acknowledge you did harm without deciding you're irredeemable." But some days I did feel irredeemable. I'd wake up and remember what I'd said, "You're not man enough for me," and feel sick all over again. Those words were designed to unmake him, to attack his masculinity, to make him feel small. I'd taken everything I knew about his insecurities and used them as weapons. His dad had called him soft when he was growing up, had pushed him into sports he didn't like, had made him feel like he had to constantly prove himself. Jake had told me this in confidence, vulnerability, trust. And when I wanted to hurt him, I went straight for that wound. 6 months after the breakup, I saw Jake at a mutual friend's birthday party. We'd both been invited, neither of us wanted to be the one to skip. He came with his new girlfriend, the one his friend had mentioned. She was pretty, bubbly, clearly smitten with him. He looked happy, really happy. I made it about an hour before I had to leave. Watching him be gentle with her, laugh at her jokes, touch her hand casually, all the things he used to do with me, was unbearable. But more than that, I could see he was relaxed in a way he hadn't been toward the end with me. Like he wasn't walking on eggshells, wasn't bracing for criticism. Taylor found me in the parking lot, sitting in my car. "You okay?" "He looks so happy." "He is, and you need to let that be okay." "I know I do, it's just hard watching him have everything we had but with someone else." "You didn't have what they have," Taylor said bluntly. "Toward the end you two were miserable, you were picking fights and pushing him away. What they have is new and unburdened by all your baggage. That's not your relationship." She was right, but it didn't make it easier. The worst realization came around month 8 when I was seeing someone casually, a perfectly nice guy who treated me well. We were having dinner and he was telling me about his day, and I found myself thinking, this is boring, he's boring. And I heard my own voice in my head saying to Jake, "You're boring." I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. This was it, the pattern. The cycle I'd repeat forever if I didn't break it. I was about to do to this new guy what I'd done to Jake, blame him for my inability to be present, to appreciate stability, to accept love without drama. I went back to the table and ended things. Not cruelly this time, just honestly. I told him I wasn't ready to date, that I had work to do on myself. He was disappointed but kind about it, and I went home and called my therapist for an emergency session. "I can't stop sabotaging," I told her. "I finally get it, I understand the pattern, but I still want to do it. I still feel that urge to destroy things when they get too real." "Understanding is the first step," she said, "but changing the behavior takes longer. You're going to have to sit with the discomfort instead of acting on it." I started attending a support group for people with attachment issues. Listening to other people's stories, the ways they'd sabotaged relationships, pushed people away, protected themselves through destruction, was like looking in a mirror. I wasn't uniquely broken. I was just broken in a very common way. But knowing I wasn't alone didn't bring Jake back. It didn't undo what I'd said or repair the damage. All my insight and therapy and growth came too late to save the relationship I'd actually wanted. A year after our breakup, I heard through the grapevine that Jake got engaged to the girlfriend I'd seen at the party. The news hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was coming. I'd lost him, completely, permanently, irrevocably. I didn't reach out to congratulate him. That would have been selfish, making his milestone about my feelings. Instead, I wrote him one final letter, not to send, just to process. I told him I was happy for him, that I hoped she knew how lucky she was, that I'd spent a year becoming someone who might have deserved him if I'd done the work sooner. Then I burned the letter and watched it turn to ash in my sink. My mom asked if I was doing okay after the engagement news. I said I was, and surprisingly I mostly meant it. I was sad, devastated, really, but also genuinely happy he'd found someone. He deserved everything I'd been too damaged to give him. Do you think you'll ever forgive yourself? She asked. I don't know, maybe forgiveness isn't the point. Maybe I just have to live with knowing I'm capable of being that cruel and make sure I never do it again. That seems very bleak, honey. It's honest, though. I'm telling this story now because last week I got a text from an unknown number. It was brief. I wanted you to know I forgive you, not for you, for me. I can't carry anger into my marriage. I hope you found peace with yourself. Jake, I read it approximately 50 times, trying to decode meaning that wasn't there. He forgave me, not because he wanted to reconcile or be friends, but because he needed to let go of what I'd done to him. It was generous and kind and so very Jake. I wrote back, thank you. That means more than you know. I'm genuinely happy for you. You deserve all the love and joy. He didn't respond, and I didn't expect him to. That was closure, the only kind we'd get. I showed the exchange to my therapist, who asked how it made me feel. Grateful, I said, and sad, and like maybe I can finally start forgiving myself if he's forgiven me. Do you think you've learned what you needed to learn from this? I learned that you can't love someone while simultaneously preparing for them to leave. I learned that stability isn't boring, it's the foundation that makes everything else possible. I learned that my words have power to destroy, and I need to be more careful with them. I learned that sometimes you don't get second chances, and you have to live with the consequences of your worst moments. That's a lot of heavy lessons. Yeah, well, I earned every one of them. The thing is, I still miss Jake. I probably always will. Not the relationship we actually had, which I'd poison with my issues, but the relationship we could have had if I'd been healthier, braver, more willing to be vulnerable. I mourn the version of us that might have existed if I'd done the work on myself before we met instead of after. But I also know that destroying that relationship was maybe the only thing that could have forced me to confront my patterns. I'd sabotaged relationships before Jake, but never so spectacularly, never with someone who actually loved me unconditionally. It took that level of loss to make me finally look at myself honestly. Some people are saying I'm playing the victim, that I'm trying to make my growth journey into some redemptive arc that absolves me of responsibility. They're not entirely wrong. There's a part of me that wants to believe all this therapy and insight means I've earned forgiveness, that I'm a different person now. But I'm not sure it works that way. I can be genuinely changed and still have done unforgivable things. Both can be true. What I know for certain is this: when I told Jake he wasn't man enough for me, I was really saying I wasn't woman enough for myself, wasn't brave enough to accept love, wasn't secure enough to believe I deserved it, wasn't healthy enough to handle the vulnerability of being truly seen. I projected all my inadequacies onto him and made him carry the weight of my fear. He's free of that now, building a life with someone who can love him without sabotaging it. And I'm here still crying sometimes, still processing, still working on becoming someone who could handle that kind of love if I'm ever lucky enough to receive it again. I don't know if I'll ever stop regretting what I said to him that night. The words replay in my mind at random moments in the shower, at the grocery store, falling asleep. You're not man enough for me. Every time I feel the shame fresh. People ask if I've learned my lesson, if I do things differently now. Of course I would. I go to therapy before the relationship imploded instead of after. I communicate my fears instead of weaponizing them. I choose vulnerability over cruelty every single time. But I can't go back. I can only move forward carrying the knowledge of what I'm capable of at my worst, trying to make sure I never hurt someone like that again. So yes, I told him he wasn't man enough for me. He left, and I can't stop crying, even a year later. Everyone thinks I'm cruel and calculating. And maybe I was in that moment. But I was also terrified and self-destructive, and so deeply broken I couldn't recognize love when it was right in front of me. I'm not asking for sympathy or absolution. I'm just asking you to understand that people can do terrible things while also hating themselves for it, can recognize their patterns while still being trapped by them, can cause irreparable harm while genuinely loving the person they've hurt. Jake forgave me so he could move on. Now I'm trying to figure out how to live with being the kind of person who needs forgiving for something like this. That's my work to do, my burden to carry, and I'll probably be carrying it for a very long time. But at least now I understand why I'm crying. It's not just grief for what I lost. It's grief for who I was when I lost it, and the slow, painful work of becoming someone different, someone better. Someone who might eventually deserve the kind of love Jake tried to give me.